Hello, and welcome to Biomass Magazine's podcast. I'm your host, Anna Simet, editor of Biomass Magazine. Today, I'm joined by Carrie Annand of the Biomass Power Association. Carrie, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Anna. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so in our last podcast, we chatted with Tim Ports, Executive Director of the Pellet Fuels Institute, about the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act on modern wood heating. And this expansive package passed on August 16th includes much more when it comes to biofuels and bioenergy. But, before we get into what is in there in regard to biomass power, Carrie, for our listeners who may not be familiar with the Biomass Power Association, could you talk a little bit about your organization, its members, and mission?
Absolutely. So I am Executive Director of the Biomass Power Association. We represent domestic biomass power producers across the country. We represent domestic biomass power producers across the country who are using organic fuels like forestry residues and agricultural byproducts to generate electricity.
Okay, and how long have you guys been around for?
I've been working with BPA for, I'm going to say about 12 years now. It has existed for longer than that. My predecessor, Bob Cleves, he has been with the organization. He still is with us, but he's been with BPA, I want to say like 20 years or so. So we've been around quite a while, and we love supporting the biomass power industry.
Right, very well established. Bob's done a lot of great work over the years. So, Carrie, let's move to the Inflation Act. There is a lot of stuff in it. I was paging through it and kind of trying to digest everything. So when it comes to biomass power, can you explain what's in it and, kind of what the impact might be?
Sure. So there's a couple of key areas that we were looking at, in analyzing the Inflation Reduction Act. One is energy tax, and the other is forest management. So on the energy tax side, there are some new, there's a little bit of a new approach to earning tax credits, whether production tax credits or the investment tax credit, which biomass power facilities are eligible for either one. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, it actually extends biomass power eligibility for these tax credits for 10 years. Which is a really big deal because in the past, we've gotten, a year here, 2 years there, which has made it very difficult for some of our members who are interested in building new facilities to plan and cite a project because that length of time will often not cover the amount of time it takes to get a biomass facility up and running. So the fact that we have sort of a 10-year runway now of biomass power eligibility is a really big deal. And the Inflation Reduction Act sort of adds some new complexities to energy tax. One of them is it kind of establishes a new base credit. So I'll back up. The energy tax provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act sort of are broken down into the first 3 years and then the second 7 years. As the full 10-year tax extension is broken down into those kind of phases. The first phase is sort of a continuation of the current approach that we use for tax credits, which we unfortunately are eligible for only half of the credit. For other technologies like wind are eligible for the full credit. The first 3 years that does not change. We're still eligible for half the credit after those 3 years are up, and then the sort of second phase of the tax credits begin. That part is known as sort of in DC as sort of the widen tech neutral tax proposal. And at that time, when that kicks in after the first 3 years, then the playing field becomes level, which is something that we have been after for a very long time. Being eligible for only half the credit, and then trying to compete with other technologies has been challenging. So we're very grateful that we're able to actually qualify for the full credit on par with wind, solar, hydropower, and all the other renewable technologies.
Right, absolutely. And kind of just a random question. Most of the biomass power plants operating today were built, a couple decades ago, and we're not really seeing a lot of new large-scale plants built, but in states like California, for example, working on the biomass power map, there is just a flurry of these smaller scale biomass power plants under development and construction. So would these facilities qualify for the tax credit? I'm assuming they would.
I believe so. I haven't not entirely certain which facilities you're referring to, but if they are using organic feedstocks like forestry residues and agricultural byproducts, and they would qualify under the definition of biomass, and they should be able to qualify for credits. They would choose either a production tax credit, which is a tax credit per kilowatt hour of energy produced and put on the grid, or an investment tax credit, which can help offset the cost of construction.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks so much for explaining that to our listeners. My final question for you, Carrie, is, outside of the Inflation Act, what legislative priorities is BPA looking at right now? Is your focus still on eRINs under the Renewable Fuel Standard?
Yes. Our top priority for several years has been to get the EPA to incorporate electricity into the Renewable Fuel Standard. We are very excited, cautiously excited that we're expecting to actually see a proposal out in November to incorporate electricity into the RFS. The ability to generate RINs for our members is extremely important. We have electricity was actually built into the Renewable Fuel Standard for those who aren't familiar with it, but it's taken the EPA a while to kind of figure out how the electricity program would work, because you're talking about electrons rather than blending ethanol into the gasoline supply, which is how most people associate the RFS. But we are expecting to see a proposal out in November, and we are thrilled that we're going to see this, and we're interested to see how the EPA is going to approach electricity.
Absolutely. We'll have to have you back then, if we see that proposal.
I'd love to.
Well, great. And, with that, I think our job here is done, Carrie. And on behalf of Biomass Magazine, I just want to thank you for joining the podcast and sharing your insight with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds great. And for our listeners, be sure to watch for our next podcast in this series on the Inflation Act. Coming next week, we will have Paul Winters of the Clean Fuels Alliance America to discuss biodiesel and sustainable aviation fuel. And we'll also have Patrick Surface of the American Biogas Council to talk about RNG and biogas. So with that, thanks for tuning in and have a great day.